This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत
This is Bharat FM.
Hi, good evening, Mumbai, India, and good morning, United States, Cincinnati, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Chicago. Welcome to Storytellers Cafe, and I'm your host, Usha Venkatraman. Storytellers Cafe is a Sunday session on Bharat FM every Sunday at 9 p.m. Indian Standard Time and 11:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. We've completed full 2 months, and this is the third month and running quite strong. So we have a special guest today, as we always have a special guest. Our guest is not only a storyteller, but also an author. Anupa Mehta. Anupa Mehta is an author and narrative therapist. I will let Anupa tell you all about what is narrative therapy. Anupa holds a master's degree in narrative therapy and community work from the University of Melbourne, Australia, and she studied at the Dulwich Centre, Adelaide. She practices narrative therapy in Mumbai for adults experiencing fear, anxiety, depression, relationship issues, and states of unease stemming from deep-seated trauma and concerns around identity. Anupa consults with individuals, couples, and families to offer support for mental and emotional well-being. Anupa also trained at Ummeed in Mumbai, and she has published works. Her book called The Waiting Room in 2007, published by Penguin, that's a novel, and Unseasonal Rain, a book of short stories. Anupa has been trained under Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, a Jungian psychoanalyst and a master storyteller in the United States. Anupa will tell you more about her training, and I invite Anupa Mehta, our guest, for the evening. Welcome, Anupa, to Storytellers Cafe.
Thank you, Usha. It's wonderful to be here, and hello to everybody who's listening in. To answer your question about narrative therapy, what is narrative therapy? As you can imagine, it's a form of psychotherapy, but it's a form of non-hierarchical therapy because narrative practice, which originated between Australia and New Zealand about 4 decades ago, holds this premise that people are experts of their lives. They already know what they must do for their own lives. And the belief that the therapist knows but the client doesn't know is, in the realm of narrative practice, it's the other way around. The therapist is just a co-collaborator on the journey, and all of us tell stories all the time. So sometimes we get, let's just say, locked in with a problem story. How do we move from a problem story to a preferred narrative? That's really what a narrative practitioner might do.
Well, thank you. I have a couple of questions for Anupa, and then Anupa will be doing a story reading later on in our program. Anupa, can you tell me what inspired you to delve into narrative therapy?
So, Usha, it's been an ongoing journey for, I think, about almost a decade now. I had an interest in mental health and psychology since my early 40s. And then I started studying counseling and psychotherapy in India. I've personally experienced different forms of therapy and recognized that there was a need for a dialogue that actually empowered people. And then I chanced upon a training program at Ummeed in Mumbai. But since we work with children and I wanted to work with adults, I decided to go to Australia, which, in Adelaide, that's the heart of narrative practice. I was very privileged to do my master's there, and decided to work in mental health. So that was one part of the journey. The other part was that, I've been using personal storytelling as a tool for transformation, in the sense that all of us tell stories all the time. Sometimes we tell the truth, sometimes we tell lies, and sometimes we make up things.
Oh, yeah.
So they're fictionalized narratives, right? So I've been doing workshops with individuals and a few corporate houses to really look at how narratives can shift and what that shift can bring about. So since I heard you say something about COVID earlier, so one of the questions I'd like to leave is, what are the stories you tell yourself about this virus? Can we look at those stories? Can the virus be something that's part of our ecosystem and not something to be afraid of? The moment we do that, we're shifting the narrative. Consider that sometimes we talk about a cockroach and a human being, and actually the cockroach might be really terrified of the human being. And here we are, trying to swat the cockroach. So,
Absolutely. That brings me to this definition of what is narration. That was something that I was, researching before
yes.
we were, narrative is a story as well as the narration. That becomes the narrative, right? So my next question to you is, during these uncertain times, mental health has become important today. That is during COVID. I mean, I'm taking off from where you left. Do you have any suggestions for our listeners for maintaining mental equanimity?
Yes, I mean, there are a few techniques we can use. So, see, for instance, we take a narrative practice idea that the person is not the problem is the problem. So, what we're saying then is that if anxiety visits you, then anxiety is the problem and you are not the problem. So, we externalize anxiety and we work with this idea that it's outside of us. So whether it's fear or anxiety or stress or worry, if we externalize this idea that anxiety visits me from time to time, then it's a more manageable state versus saying, I am anxious. So really, as you talked about the narration, the way in which we present our narratives, it's crucial because we're really looking at what we're owning as being a part of us and what is something that is external to us. And can we shift the lens with which we're looking at what is external?
Thank you, Anupa. I would like you to tell our viewers about your personal experience, with especially with Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, or an experience or a personal story based on your work.
Thank you, Usha. I'd be happy to share. My earliest recollection of storytelling is on my grandmother's lap. She had this really warm, comfortable, large lap. And a lot of my early years was spent on her lap eating Gujarati food and being told stories from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And somewhere, all those ideas of valor and, gratitude and the sense of cosmic energy all around us sort of became something that one kind of grew up on, almost a diet. And then in college, I followed journalism and I began writing. In 2007, I wrote my first novel, which is set in Istanbul, partly. And so there were these journeys which I've taken, where I ended up meeting a lot of mystics, including storytellers from the Hopi tradition, the Maoris, the other healers from New Zealand and Australia, as well as Sufi mystics. So, everything that we talk about is a story. And really, the story has been with us since time immemorial. It's as old as man himself or herself. I should say they. However, the geometry of storytelling if you really look at the circle of storytelling, it's about the wholeness of everything. And I think that my journeys have really been to understand that it's a story is a story is a story is not such a simple idea. There are just layers and layers and layers, and as we go along, stories open up worlds. And I think that really my interest in storytelling comes from there. I enjoy writing short stories because they bring to me a sense of brevity, and my focus in the book Unseasonal Rain has been to look at the idea of loss. And loss is something that permeates all our lives. It could be something extremely mundane, such as the loss of an object, a favorite umbrella, or it could be the death of somebody who you loved very much. And what you do with that loss, I think that's what shapes our lives.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely bang on. I agree with you totally. In fact, when you were talking about a story going layers, I did a workshop recently with Laura Sims, a celebrated storyteller from New York,
Yeah.
The Gold Within Our Story,
Sure.
peeling the layers and examining a story. So
Sure.
that was wonderful. When we were talking earlier, you were telling me about your experience in Sedona or Denver, where you trained with Dr. Estes. I think that would really interest our viewers, if
Okay.
you can
So,
share that.
sure. So there was one journey that I took through Sedona, New Mexico with the healers, which was a little before my first program with Dr. Estes. And I'd been reading her book right through college, and suddenly to discover that it was possible to go and work with her. So my first program was about 5 years ago. And one of her teachers was Indian. So I don't
Mhm.
know whether it was the kinship, but something happened and there was this magical connection. And then I ended up going after 5 years, which was last year. Um, Dr. Estes is also, from the tradition of curanderismo. So she's Mexican and using shamanic ideas as a form of healing. So, there's this idea that every time a story is told, it becomes night. And, we would spend days with her and people would ask me, so what did you do? But there was no schedule. It was just about one thing leading into another, into a third, into a fourth. And then she would read from her books, including Women Who Run with the Wolves. So I think it was that whole act of listening, which was transformational. So when somebody's reading to you versus telling you a story or performing a story, there's a sense of comfort because it, brings back a childhood memory of being lulled to sleep, perhaps, by being told a story. So I used to also write a lot of nonsensical, as I would call them, stories for my daughter, who's now 28. So storytelling has been a part of my life in different ways. With Dr. Estes, I learned about more than the therapeutic power of stories. We understand that all stories have a therapeutic power. But I also understood about, what you can't catch, that ephemeral, mystical magic that resides in a story. And I think that is something that can only be felt. I don't think it can be taught, or not, neither can you kind of encapsulate it, and that's what it was. So on the journey itself, before I met Dr. Estes, I remember meeting these really beautiful beings. And I was almost drawn to them, 3 or 4 of them. And they looked at me and they said, "Oh, it's you." And I had no idea what was going on. So, I never met these people in my life. But clearly they had met me and they knew me and they recognized me from some long ago time. Because one of the Hopi healers came up and said, "Oh, I didn't know you were coming and I didn't bring you anything. But here," and she gave me this necklace, which had the medicine wheel. And at that time, I did not understand the importance of what she was saying. And that was about now 7 years ago. And today I am, working in a more contemporary way as a medicine woman, so to speak. So I think it was like it was like a prescient moment. And there are these kind of glimpses and flashes of magic that populate our lives all the time. We just need to be open to it. We just need to be listening.
Absolutely. I fully agree with you. I'm a little bit of a healer, so I understand you completely. And I'm also doing a roundtable kind of a training with a group of people based in Lebanon and all over the world, where we are talking about the power of listening well. The power of connecting and listening. I fully, absolutely resonate with you. So I'm just going to quickly ask the last question, and then Anupa, you can continue with your reading from your book. What advice do you have for anyone who's interested in exploring narrative therapy as a career option? Do you have any wisdom or something to tell?
Well, I would just share from my experience that it's important to do short programs first to see if you resonate with the practice, because the practice doesn't look at diagnosis. We believe that people are more than their diagnosis. So keeping that aside, we stop slotting people into compartments, boxes, and look at the potential that the person brings. So that's something to think about, If one is used to a certain conventional way of practicing therapy, then this might be a little different. Apart from that, I think that, as speaking for India, there are not so many programs in India. It's relatively new, but it's being practiced widely in the United States, in Canada, in Australia. So there are some really fine practitioners across the world, and it would be great to train with, one of the best, so to speak, if you can manage to do that. Because, it's a little difficult to do a short program and then become a narrative practitioner. I think one just needs to be following a rigorous training. And as a career, I think it's very heartening. I had this one case, if I may talk about it very briefly, where an extremely intelligent artist and a writer and a poet had been through various psychiatrists and therapists and come up with all kinds of diagnoses. And it was very disturbing for her because nobody was able to see her inherent skills. Now, she worked with me for about 2 years, and recently I said, do you really need to see me anymore? And she said, I don't need to, but I do want to. And, she was getting ready to spread her wings. So it was really wonderful to see that. And I remember her saying that, I feel like somebody finally saw me.
That's beautiful. Yes. So now I won't keep you away from the listeners and the viewers. Anupa will read from her book. Like I said, Anupa is an author as well. She's published 2 books, Anupa, or more than that, 1 book on short stories and the other one.
Some more books, but those were, they were non-fiction. So.
Okay. So I leave you to Anupa Mehta. The stage is yours, Anupa.
Thank you, Sha. So, hello again, everybody. This is a copy of my book, Unseasonal Rain. It's a book of short stories, came out in 2014, and then there was a second edition in 2018. So, I've chosen to read an excerpt from a section called Lists. And the 3 characters in the story are a girl called Ronita, her friend Tanu, and Ronita's aunt Kamal Foy, who lives in a very large bungalow in Mumbai. So against this backdrop, the story unfolds. My colleague Ronita often joked about her aunt Kamal's compulsive need to make lists. A widow in her 60s, Kamal, Ronita called her Kamal Foy, lived alone in a huge bungalow in Vile Parle in suburban Mumbai. Kamal was inordinately fond of Ronita, her brother's daughter, a fact that Ronita was slightly embarrassed about, as the old lady often showed up at her office with a box of home-cooked Gujarati food, which could include sweets and savories such as churmana ladu, dhokla, khandvi, khichu. Last Thursday, she brought puran polis, delectable rotis stuffed with a filling made of brown lentils, sweetened with jaggery, and scented with cardamom and strands of saffron. Biting greedily into one, I asked Ronita about her aunt's need to make lists and whether she'd seen any of them. Ronita laughed and said, "Kya? She's really old. You know how they forget things. She's had a hard life. Her daughter died at 19, and now that her husband too has passed away, she hasn't much left to do, I guess, except to make lists." Given my own proclivity towards lists, I found it hard to dismiss Ronita's aunt's need to make them. On an impulse, I asked her if I could accompany her when she next visited her aunt. She stared at me as though I had lost my mind. After a while, she answered, "Okay, why not? I'll ask her since you're so keen. It'll make me feel less guilty about not being able to give her the attention she craves." The next day, she said, "Hey, Tanu, I asked my aunt if I could bring a guest, and she was thrilled. She's invited us to have lunch with her this Sunday." On Saturday evening, Ronita rang to say that her boyfriend wanted to take her to Mud Island for some private time. She asked if I would be her alibi. I agreed reluctantly, wondering aloud if she'd be back in time for her aunt's lunch. She said, "Oh, damn, I forgot." "Okay, you go and make up an excuse about some extra work, or she'll ring my mom and it'll turn into a massive drama." Ronita had left me with the prospect of visiting an elderly lady I didn't know. I decided to play along, mostly because I was curious and felt sympathetic towards Ronita's aunt, who reminded me of my late mother. At 11 a.m. the next morning, it was the auspicious month of Shravan, and Ganesh Chaturthi was just round the corner. I left for her place, taking with me a steel box filled with homemade coconut modaks. I took the train north, Dadar, Matunga, Mahim, Bandra, Khar, Santa Cruz, till it drew to a slow halt at Ville Parle station. Reaching her home at 12 p.m., I made my way into a sprawling compound with an overgrown garden. Fragrant rathrani bushes and a spreading champa tree marked a scented trail along a paved path that led to the door of an aging bungalow. Pausing for a moment to inhale the aroma of the flowers, I took in the surroundings. Then climbed a small flight of fading marble steps and pressed hard on an old-fashioned wooden doorbell. A musical peal resounded through the house. It must require a certain kind of courage to live alone in a large bungalow with no security guards, I thought. After a few seconds, I heard slippers flapping against the door. The doorknob turned and half of the double door opened inwards. Kamal Foy stood there in a crisp white cotton sari worn the Gujarati way. She wore a red bindi and a big smile which faltered slightly when she saw me standing there alone. "Where is Ronita?" she inquired. I jumped guiltily into the excuses that Ronita had cooked up and gingerly asked if I could still stay for lunch. "Yes, of course, how rude of me," she mumbled, urging me to come in. We sat in a cavernous living room with Art Deco furniture and walls painted in bright hues, but they were peeling at the edges. She saw me looking around and said that her late husband used to rent out the bungalow for film shootings, that the production staff often painted the house in bright mismatched shades. The last unit, they were shooting for a mega production, had forgotten to return the walls to their original alabaster white. She listed some of the famous actors and directors from Mumbai film world who had been to her house. Amir Khan, Farah Khan, Ashutosh Govarikar, Rani Mukherjee, Kareena Kapoor. The meal itself was elaborate and lasted for well over an hour. She'd cooked many dishes for her niece, although it was I who ended up polishing off the delicious home-cooked fare. As she talked, I ate. Magni dal, kadhi, khata dhokla, shrikhand, ghugra, puri, vatananu shak, and rice. Fragrant basmati rice. We spoke about many things, including my mother, who had believed that food is connected to God and that some people are blessed with magic in their hands because they are able to cook and Feed people food that tastes divine. At 2 p.m., ready for a snooze, I motioned that I had to leave. Kamalfai appeared sad at the thought. It was evident that the rest of her Sunday still loomed up ahead of her, while I had a host of errands to catch up. Come again, beta, she said ever so wistfully. I smiled and nodded, unable to comprehend why I was drawn to her. Monday mornings sped manically into Monday afternoon, the ways they are prone to in our office. I marked an hourly progress by scratching items off my to-do list, and I took a short break at 1:30 p.m. to eat a sandwich with my coffee. Just then, Ronita called out to me from across the room, "Hey Tanu, wait up." She brought along her plate of rice and yogurt, sat next to me and exclaimed, "Hey, thanks, yaar. Milind and I had a great Sunday afternoon. To add to that, Kamal Foy was ecstatic when I rang her on my way back. She bought the excuses you gave her. She loved having you over and wants you, imagine, she said you, Tanu, and not me, to visit her again soon." 4 days later, Kamal Foy walked into our lunchroom, eyes darting all over the place, looking for her niece. She was dressed in an indigo blue-black printed sari, her hair in a tight bun, and she wore sparkling diamond earrings, which the Gujaratis call lavingya, their solitaires. She found Ronita, who, as always, was embarrassed at seeing her aunt walk in amidst a fashionable advertising crowd. I could see Ronita trying to steer her aunt towards the exit. But the old lady stood her ground and continued talking. After a moment, Ronita turned and spotted me in the dining room. Taking her aunt by the arm, she made her way towards me, a plastic bag stuffed with dabbas of food in her hand. She approached me and said, "I'm sorry to disturb you, but Kamal Foy wanted to meet you before she leaves." At this point, I'm going to stop reading just so that we keep our time. And I would like to state that if anybody would like to read the rest of the story, we'll be posting a PDF of the story on the Bharat FM page. Thank you. I hope that was all right.
Oh, that was wonderful. You were a wonderful guest because you kept to the time. We still have definitely a 4 minutes, Anupa, and I loved your story. This is my son-in-law is a Gujarati, so
Okay.
Foi and all the Khatunu Shak, and my Samdi is an amazing cook. So when you were describing, my mouth was watering. I was wondering, when am I going to get to eat all this? And so descriptive, and this is what, when you take a book, and for a storyteller, that description is actually everything, because a story is all about the description, the adjectives, painting a picture. The words paint a visual picture, and that's what your story was doing. I really enjoyed it, had my laugh as well, about Ronita and her aunt and the diamonds and the solitaire.
Yeah. So I remember that, somebody who's shortlisted for the Man Booker this year, she wrote a little blurb for my short stories. So this was about 6 years ago. And she said that, I can actually, because she's Gujarati too, she said, "I can see my family, just the way you describe it, with the way people comb their hair, diamonds they wear, the way food is cooked." And I think that's really the power of narratives, Usha, since we were talking about narratives. So when I listen to clients, I think we're listening very carefully for also the cultural context in which people work. What your milieu is, how has patriarchy shaped your outlook, and what are the things that bring you comfort, what are the things that bring you joy. And I think food, celebrations, these are all an essential part of Indian culture, whether it's in India or it's in the United States. I think that Indians anywhere will be looking at all these aspects to enrich their lives. And stories of, of many Indian traditions also look at the nurturing power of food and the nurturing power of storytelling.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Anupa. That was, I think I had a wonderful time. I like listening to stories, and I was being told a story. Thank you very much. Storytellers Cafe is indeed very honored to host you, Anupa, today. And
Thank you.
that is the intention of Storytellers Cafe, not only to bring storytellers, we also want authors, we want people to tell their personal stories, the different genres, all become stories. And how do we tell? Our life is a narrative, like you said. We are born in that. And I mean, all of us tell a story. It's how well we tell a story is what makes us, I think, stand out as storytellers.
Thank you
So
so much. It's been lovely being here, and thank you for having me with you.
thank you, Anupa. Thank you for all the viewers out there. We will be having another storyteller next Sunday, somebody from Indonesia. So stay tuned to Storytellers Cafe. And that's Usha Venkatraman signing off. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत
This is Bharat FM.